I'm going to decision here. The first one, you're looking for the quantum signature from the restricted syndrome recording normal. That will give the presentation, please.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm going to present to you joint work with Marco Baldi, Alessio Pavoni, Paolo Santini, Antonia Wachtertze, and Violetta Vega. Now, I'd like to start by reminding you of NIST's call for additional signatures. This might seem like a generic way of starting a session on signatures, but in my case, it really makes sense because among the 40 submissions they received last summer, there's CROSS, which stands for Codes and Restricted Objects Signature Scheme. And this submission has actually originated from the work I'm going to present to you today. CROSS is built out of two main ingredients. The first one is a CVE-like zero-knowledge protocol. This is a simple but efficient protocol that we turn into a signature using the Fiat-Shamir transform and complement with various standard optimizations. Now, what's maybe not so standard is our second ingredient, the underlying hard problem. And there, CROSS relies on restricted decoding problems. This is what I'm going to focus on today. And my goal is to explain to you how the restricted decoding problems relate to the classical decoding problems that you might know. And also, I'm going to try to convince you that these problems are promising for building digital signature schemes. Okay, let's first make sure that we're all on the same page regarding the classical syndrome decoding problem, abbreviated as SDP. In this problem, here stated in non-binary form, one is given a parity check matrix H and a syndrome S, both over a finite field Fp, as well as a weight restriction W. The problem is solved by finding an error vector E, which satisfies the check equations and the weight restriction. Here we're usually talking about the Hamming metric, which means that our weight restriction really only distinguishes between zero and non-zero entries of the error. Now, a little more attention is paid to the error values when we're considering the restricted variant, to which we refer as RSDP. In this generalization of SDP, one is further given a restriction, which is a set of size Z, and I'll denote this by E. Now, this restriction is used in the following value. An error is now only valid if it also has only entries in E, apart from its zeros. So, of course, within this restricted variant, we can recover the classical SDP by putting all our non-zero field elements in our restriction. But if we choose a smaller value for Z, we also have a hard problem. And for smaller values of Z, we can actually increase the error rate. This impacts the complexity of solvers, which I'd like to show you down here. You can see the complexity of a Stern-Dumer-like algorithm for different sizes of E. You can observe that in the case of classical SDP, the algorithm is able to exploit the sparsity of the solution. As we decrease Z, the error rate grows, and therefore also the complexity increases. The maximum is reached approximately when full weight errors are guaranteed to be unique with good probability. Now, this solver is pretty generic in the sense that it doesn't take the full structure of E into account. And indeed, we can do considerably better if our restriction has additive structure. For example, when all our elements are of small norm, well, then we basically have a lattice problem and need to take into account the corresponding techniques as well as surprise panel discussions. But when our set E is basically random with no or little additive structure, well, then this turns out to be the best known solver. This is something we want to keep in mind when we are designing a suitable restriction E. So on one hand, we would like to avoid additive structure. On the other hand, of course, we need to be able to design an efficient scheme later. It turns out that we can fulfill both these requirements by picking a multiplicative restriction, which is nothing else than a multiplicative subgroup of Fp star. So choose your favorite element G of multiplicative order set and use all its powers as your error values. Now, this strong multiplicative structure seems to be difficult to exploit in a solver, since it does not interact nicely with the additive linearity of the check equations. And also with respect to the additive structure, we are fine. At least for many of the subgroups, we can observe that they have little to no additive structure. Also, the error values that you have been seeing here on the right-hand side are actually not random, but a multiplicative subgroup. Okay, so by now, you might be wondering how exactly we're going to benefit from this structure in designing a scheme. To illustrate this to you, let us consider a generic zero-knowledge proof for a secret error vector. In such a protocol, a prover and a verifier exchange commitments, challenges, responses. Irrespective of the exact protocol that is being executed, at some point, either an error E prime or a map that acts transitively on the errors is communicated. Now, in the case of SDP, our errors lie, as you have seen, on the hemisphere. And then it turns out that a suitable choice for the maps are the monomial transformations. So those consist of a permutation and arbitrary non-zero scaling coefficients, and those are necessary to achieve a zero-knowledge property that we'd like to have. When we move to RSDP, well, we don't need arbitrary error values anymore, only those in the restricted sphere. And also for our maps, we don't need arbitrary scalings anymore. Those in E are sufficient thanks to our multiplicative property. Now, with that, we have slightly smaller sizes of our objects, but we can do considerably better when we're in the full weight case. In the full weight case, all our entries of E are of the same type. They are all in our restriction. And therefore, we neither have to communicate error positions, nor do we have to communicate a permutation for our maps. And as a consequence, together with the observation that the complexity coefficients are quite high when we are in this full weight setting, we can now achieve quite compact objects. Now that's nice, but the story doesn't end here. To go beyond the case of RSDP, we make the following observation. E power n has group structure with respect to the element-wise product. And as a consequence, instead of sampling our errors and our maps from E power n, we can also sample them from a subgroup G. Now, G has less elements, and therefore we can represent them in a more compact way. Of course, that does not change only the sizes of the objects, but also the underlying problem. And to stress that, we have given the subgroup variant of RSDP its own name. We refer to it as RSDPG. Now, RSDPG is really the same as RSDP with full weight errors, apart from the fact that now one is given the subgroup in which the error lies. This additional information can be taken into account by an attacker, and indeed it is used by the best known solvers. But that does not mean that the problem necessarily gets easier by defining such a restriction to a subgroup. You can think about it in the following way. You start with an RSTP instance, and then from this RSTP instance with a lot of solution, you specify the subgroup such that you end up with a unique error. And with such a suitable choice of parameters under the best known solvers, we observe that elements of G can be represented using less than 2 lambda bits, where lambda denotes the security level and is therefore an obvious lower bound on the size of the objects. Okay, so now we're almost as small as we can get, and it's time that we use these objects for a signature scheme. For that, we can start with a lot of protocols from literature. And indeed, in our work, we have experimented with a lot of them. Often, you only need minor modification to turn a proof of knowledge for SDP or a related problem into one for RSTP or RSTPG. And one example can be seen here. So here we adopted a protocol proposed by Bidou and Gabori, and we refer to the restricted variant as RBG. Now, this protocol works in a very similar way to the original proposal. Therefore, I'm not going to go into any details. If you're familiar with their work, basically the modification that you need to make is where you usually would create shared commutations, you now create shares of your secret error vector. When you do that and you turn it into a signature, what you observe is that you obtain slightly smaller sizes than in the original proposal. Now, the comparison that might be more interesting to you is the one with the NIST submissions. And here we can observe, when we consider the signature size and the verification time, that the signatures obtained via the RBG approach end up in a similar ballpark as those of the other submissions. This might not be surprising to you because most of the code-based candidates also follow the approach of turning a zero-knowledge protocol into a signature via the Fiat-Shamir transform. But for us, it was still a nice result, in particular, since we're talking about a proof of concept implementation for our proposal. Now, for some more details on the comparison, here we can see that PERC, which is these dots, achieves a quite similar trade-off as our proposal. And this is due to them also utilizing the BG protocol. CROSS, on the other hand, as mentioned, uses the same underlying problems, but has a different profile due to the fact that its protocol is simpler and therefore more efficient. Okay, now with this observation, let me come to the conclusion of my presentation. We have been talking about RSTP and RSTPG, which are restricted generalization of the classical syndrome decoding problem. I've shown to you that these problems enable compact messages and are therefore promising for building signature schemes. In particular, one has a lot of freedom in choosing protocols since a lot of existing ones can be adopted to the restricted case. Now, here are 3 open questions that I would consider interesting. The first one, well, is the obvious one. The problems are quite new, so it would be interesting to study the complexity of solving them further. The second one asks for utilizing the nice properties of RSTP and RSTPG to a higher extent. Right now, what we're doing is we're adopting protocols, but maybe one can do way better by tailoring one to the problems and designing it from scratch. And finally, I would be interested in seeing subgroup variants of other problems and how they perform. Now, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. If you'd like to learn more about CROSS or also the restricted decoding problems, feel free to follow this QR code, which will take you to our homepage. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
What do you mean for the understand the difference between the RSTP and the RSTPG? So is the main difference, so in RSTP, we have a weight constraint and we are not given G. And then in the RSTPG, everything's the same weight. So we don't have the weight constraint, we're given that G.
Basically, you're right, yes. So maybe just to repeat it for everyone, in RSTP, what we do is we restrict the error values to a smaller set, increases the error weight. You can now go up to full weight with reasonably high complexity coefficients. And then you're at this point, you can go even further and specify a subgroup.
Thank you. And so for the RSTP, is that pretty much applicable to any specific weight, or are you mostly looking at sort of metrics?
Sorry, could you repeat this?
Sorry, for when we were talking about the weight, have you all looked at like all the different types of metrics, or is this mostly unit weight?
So when we're talking about turning the problem into a signature in the end, then usually it's convenient to use something like the Hamming metric. For example, what else do we have? We have the Lee metric, for example, but then the problem is that our maps leak the information of the entries of the error. So that's usually not suitable. And for this reason, we really have focused on the Hamming metric there.
Thank you.
So for your theoretical one for this STP, so what's the soundness error? Soundness error for this execution.
It depends on the protocol you use. So in the RBG protocol, well, it creates those shares and then you reveal all of them but one to the verifier, which basically means that when you have n shares, you have a soundness error of 1 divided by n. But in cross, actually, with the CVE protocol, the soundness error is way higher because it's a CVE-like protocol, which you can compensate by just doing more rounds.
So, but in the implementation concept that you gave, so what's the number of repetition?
What's the number of repetition?
Yeah, how many times you have repeated?
That's a good question. Well, in the end, you have to take into account also the KZ forgery attack for cross. Because it's a 5-pass scheme, I'm unfortunately not able to tell you the numbers by heart, but I can show them to you later if you're interested.
Sure. Okay, let's test it again. Sorry. How the result shock nature from regular syndrome recording and what is in the head? How would we relation?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Is the volume okay? Okay. Thanks to the Sebastian's great talk, my burden is greatly relieved. In this talk, I will introduce our recent work on constructing signatures from regular syndrome decoding adoption. I'll begin with the motivation of this work why we are interested in such a signature. This slide is a bit cliche. Anyway, 3 algorithms won the competition of NIST, and 2 of them are lattice-based and 1 is hash-based. In terms of the diversity of the assumptions, the result is not very satisfactory. So this began another round of competition to look for algorithms from different assumptions. Natural idea is to consider the learning parity with noise assumption or known as the syndrome decoding assumption because it has a very similar form compared with the LWE. In LWE, we work modulo P, while in LPN, we work in the GF2, and in LWE, the noise is of a low Euclidean norm. In the LPN, the noise is normally low Hamming weights. Unfortunately, as we look deeper, we discover that the techniques that allow efficient lattice-based signatures do not translate directly into the LPN world. So we have to resort to the previously mentioned framework. Luckily, the GF2, which analyzes the basic LPN variant that we consider in this work, it allows very efficient and generic multi-party computation. And a classical paradigm called MPC in the head allows the MPC into a zero-knowledge protocol. And therefore, a number of works follows this paradigm, and they report increasingly better efficiency. And among them, there is a submission to the previously mentioned NIST completion. So previous works essentially follows this diagram. We first design a MPC protocol, converted into a ZK. Independently, there has been another line of work that designed zero-knowledge proofs that are very efficient in the vector OLE hybrid model. In those works, however, the VLE is realized in a way such that the verifier requires private point. So the result is a designated verifier proof, and we cannot apply Fetch-Hamir directly. In last year's crypto, there is a new framework called vector OLE in the head that connects these two lines of works. So the natural question which we investigate in this work is what is the efficiency of RSD-based signature using these new lines of transformation? In this work, we show that using a technique called linear sketch that appears previously in the distributed point function literature, we can construct a efficient zero-knowledge protocol for the RSD problem in the VLE hybrid model. And then using this transformation, we can get a signature scheme as smaller signature size compared with the state-of-the-art. As an independent contribution, we use a technique called half-tree that reduces the computational complexity of a component in this transformation. In the rest of this talk, I will explain the high-level ideas of the transformation, and then we show how to prove the RSD problem in this framework. And finally, we report the experimental results. So this framework essentially provides a way to realize the vector OLE functionality in a public point manner, such that the zero-knowledge protocols that rely on this functionality can also be made public point. This functionality gives the verifier a global key and a local key, which is a vector, and to the sender a message, which is random and its corresponding MAC tag. This information should satisfy this correlation. This correlation is also known as information theoretic message authentication code, because can let the prover to open a message by sending the message itself, as well as the corresponding MAC tag. In order to open a different message, the prover has to provide the corresponding MAC tag, and that is equivalent to guessing the global key, which is unlikely. So we get authentication in the sense that the prover cannot change the vector being authenticated. I would like to mention that this representation has linear homomorphism, and using this property, we can let the prover to fix this vector into an arbitrary vector by sending the difference, and the two parties can perform batch opening on a random linear combination of the batch. In this slide, I want to show that with the input being authenticated, it is extremely easy to construct a proof. Suppose we want to prove this quadratic correlation, and A1, A2, A3 have already been authenticated. The verifier can simply locally compute this value, and if we expand and regroup the terms, we can discover that the correlation to prove appears on the quadratic curve. So were the correlation to hold, then the b value should be a linear function in delta. To show this, the prover simply sends the coefficient a1, a0 to the verifier, and this is a proof. And once again, we can prove multiple correlations by working on the random linear combination of those equations. I would also like to mention that this green box is public point. So I will show the working detail of this paradigm in a three-step process. The first step is an observation that if this zero-knowledge protocol requires a simpler oblivious transfer functionality, since the zero-knowledge protocol is public point, the verifier's OT output is only needed until the very end of the protocol. So this box can be realized by having the prover sending the commitment to the verifier first, then they run the ZK protocol, and the verifier simply asks the prover to open the corresponding commitment. Since the commitment is binding, and at this point, the prover cannot change the previous transfer, we have soundness. This transformation can be generalized to O(1) random OT by using a O(1) vector commitment that supports O(1) open. Step is to show that O(1) random OT is actually equivalent to a small field VLE. To show this, the prover defines the VLE message to be the summation of the OT outputs, the MAC tag to be the summation of OT message times the negation of index. The verifier defines the global key to be the counter out output, the index, and the local key to be this summation. Notice that the verifier doesn't know M alpha, but that is okay because in this summation, M alpha is timed with verifier still can locally evaluate this value. And you can verify that KU is indeed alpha times Q. So this is a VLE correlation. One problem though is that since the parties work, their computation is linear in the capital N, so N cannot be very large, but the entropy of this global key is log of N, so the entropy is small. But we need a large entropy key to ensure soundness in the subsequent zero-knowledge protocol. So we have to repeat this process multiple times. We can arrange the output in this matrix format. Each column represents one repetition. And now the key vector has enough entropy. But in order to make those keys function as a whole, we need the corresponding messages to be the same. To do this, we can simply decompose the U prime matrix into the desired format and plus a correction term. The prover simply sends the correction term to the verifier, and by local processing, the two parties can get the desired correlation. I would like to point out that to ensure the correct C is sent, the two parties actually run another round of checking to ensure this. And this check introduces one bit of leakage about delta. Now we show how to prove the RST problem in this paradigm. Our first step is to consider the dual of LPN problem. This is done by multiplying the equation with the kernel of A, thus eliminating the first term. The prover now only has to show the knowledge of the low-hanging weight E such that HE is Y. This form is commonly referred to as syndrome decoding. Our next step is to restrict our attention to the regular variant of syndrome decoding. In particular, we consider E to have this structure. E is divided into several equal length blocks. Each block is a unit vector. So we only have to prove that each block has Hamming weight 1. So how to do this? All that we are in the vector LE hybrid model, the two parties can get authentication of this vector E. For each block, the verifier samples two challenges And the two parties prove these two constraints. Here, angled bracket denotes vector in a product, and the circle denotes vector component-wise multiplication. Since the R vectors are public, the first constraint is a quadratic constraint on the E values, and it can be done using previously mentioned methods. The second one can be done using the linear homomorphism of Etimark and Etimark opening. So, for completeness, suppose that EI is a unit vector, then inner product with EI simply reveals the non-zero coordinate, like so. So the first constraint is satisfied. Also, since EI is a unit vector, the summation of all EI components gives us 1. So the second constraint is also satisfied. As for soundness, suppose that EI has more than one non-zero coordinates, then inner product with EI gives us the summation of more than one terms, and the result has this structure. If we will each R as a variable, then the result is a multivariate quadratic equation. And using the short simple lemma, we can conclude that except with negligible probability, the result is non-zero. So by running this check, we can infer that the EI vector is either of Hamming weight 0 or 1. The next check ensures that the Hamming weight is non-zero, so we conclude that EI is a unit vector. By running this test on all the blocks, we can prove regularity. Finally, for the experimental results, in the signature scheme, we additionally apply two optimizations. The first one is folklore in the literature. Namely, we can consider the syndrome to have the the parity check matrix to have the systematic form. This allows the prover to only having to commit to the shorter vector EB, and they can reconstruct the whole vector using this linear correlation. The second one is that when instantiating the vector commitment, we need to run a GGM tree. And instead of using a PRG to populate the tree, we can use a circular correlation robust half function. This would theoretically save half of this AES cost. We select the RSD parameters according to the bit security formula in a recent work. And we implemented the signature by adapting the reference implementation of FIST. FIST is a signature scheme in the original vector LAE in the hand paper, and the underlying value function is AES. As you can see, in terms of signature size, we have a smaller size compared with FIST, and the running time is roughly the same. Compared with syndrome decoding in the hand, however, our running time is significantly worse than theirs because our implementation is more of a proof of concept. Their implementation is highly optimized. But in terms of size, we achieved roughly 50% compared with syndrome. In this slide, I want to show that in terms of signatures plus public key size, our performance approaches the performance of Elysium. But once again, since our implementation is currently a bit rudimentary, the runtime is significantly worse than this. So we
So this is way more and I think so can you say as how much expect for revenue?
So when selecting the parameters, we investigated a recent algorithmic attack paper, and we discovered that their attack doesn't apply to our parameter regime. So the bit security would be the estimated security would be significantly higher than, say, using RSD. So we didn't take that into consideration in this figure, in this table. But I think there might be several ideas to use algebraic attack on regular structure. Yeah.
Yeah. I have question. So, what are the major reasons that high efficiency advantage compared to the SD in the head?
In the SD in the head, the
So due to your technical improvement or due to the some kind of inherent advantage to the
in SD in the head, the prover has to commit to another two polynomials, and that will contribute the communication and in turn in the signature. In this proof, we do not have to make that commitment. So that is one point. The other one is that syndrome decoding uses MPC in the head and VLE in the head. There's a recent paper that reveals that VLE in the head is essentially can be viewed as MPC in the head. A recent different paper, but we can use this proof idea in the syndrome decoding in the head, and I think that would save a few, save some communication, but would still be that's the caused by the difference of the framework.
Another question is that here you have to work with many blocks of the regular workspace. So intuitively you have to work with a longer witness. So why compared to the normal ordinary syndrome recording?
No, this is not very long actually.
Not very.
You see, this is n parameter. Compared with AES, this is already smaller.
I see. Any other questions? Thanks. Okay. Third one and last conversation is ranking parallel OS implication for early and database changes.
Thanks for the introduction. This is Join War with Suji Katamata and Mishai right today. And so firstly, I will give a brief introduction to blind signature, and I will talk about introduce our concurrent attack. And I will have two open problems on this topic. So firstly, let me introduce what's the blind signature. Blind signature, we have two parties. One is a user and a signer. And the user has one message and signer has the public key. And they want to do something called blind signature in here. So after this could be interactive. And after the interaction, the user obtains the signature of the message. And because it is a two-party computation. So we have notion for each party. The first one is notion for the user. And so now, but this one is not relevant to our attack. So I will just mention it briefly. And now for the blindness notion, the signer is malicious, and the malicious signer will choose two messages and let the user to do the signing interaction with him. And then the only thing the user can choose is the order of the message to be signed by the signer. So it's like message 0 or message 1 or message 1 message 0. And then after the interaction, he sent the signatures to the signer, and then the signer of the bit defined here to guess what's the order used by the user. And then the other notion is called L1 more unforgeability. Is now the user is malicious. The malicious user choose a message here, and he can choose this message, of course, adaptively, and he can do a concurrent signing session together with the signer here. And then after the interactions, if the user can obtain L+1 signatures, then we say the user breaks the 1 more unforgeability. And blind signature is a notion proposed by Chong in 1982, and it getting more attention this year because of its application, like eCash. This is the initial application proposed by Chong, and also like e-voting. For example, in the previous slide, we can let the signer to be like a government and the user to be the voter, and the blindness ensure that the government cannot know the voter's choice. And one more opportunity, make sure that the voter cannot cheat in the voting system. And also has some other application like anonymous credential and privacy preserving, authentication tokens, and hiding metadata in secure messaging. And so, okay, it sounds good. But how to construct a blind signature? The first message is there are two main approaches. There are some of them, but the two main approaches as follows. The first one is frictionless framework. It leads to a non-optimal blind signature, require a proof system for complex relations. And if it is too raw, it's naturally immune to the adaptive attack. And so, of course, our target is the next one to build blind signature from schema protocols. And this, as you may know, to have a schema protocol, we can build a signature scheme. And as long as your schema protocol has some spatial properties, then you can turn this schema protocol into a blind signature scheme. But this spatial properties is kind of spatial. So at the current stage, we only have 4 sigma protocol-based post-quantum blind signature. 3 are in from lattice, including HQN20 and Blaze Plus and Blind OR, and also SRG has 1 from Seattle last year. And it also worthwhile to remark that along with the development of the latest zero-knowledge proof, the efficient method is become more efficient now. You can have signatures around like 20 to 100 kilobytes for blind signature. And our contribution is very simple. We break 3 sigma protocol base post-quantum blind signature, including Seattle, Blaze Plus, and Blind OR. And we have an independent and its theoretical test that we propose an abstract parallel rows problem and establish the connection to the rows problem. It's for theoretical sense, but I will not talk about this in this talk. So, the first question is that why can we have an attack? If you have faith in security proof, you will feel surprised that why can we have an attack? Because those papers are security proof, no? This is because let's take Seattle, for example. Seattle, they have the 1 more security proof. It has loss in QH of L+1. Q is the number of hash queries, and L is the number of concurrent signing sessions. So this means that the blind signature of like Seattle, they are sequentially secure, or like log lambda concurrently secure. They can only support concurrent signing session for a small number of concurrent sessions. But we have to emphasize that this loss is very common in the sigma protocol-based blind signature. But to have loss in security proof is something different from you have an attack. So the problem is what happens if you have the number of concurrent signing sessions that exceed the bound implied by the proof. So to motivate, I want to talk the story about the Blind-Schnorr scheme and the Rawls attack. Blind-Schnorr is proposed by von Trappe and Sturm in 2000 year. It is a sigma protocol-based blind signature based on the Schnorr signature scheme. And the proof, the security proof has Q to the L a loss. So which means that the L is only secure up to straight to the 20, can only serve 20 concurrent signing sessions. But no one knows what happens if you sign more. And after the 1 year, Schnorr proposed so-called Rawls problem, and he proved that this ONU proof can be tightly equivalent to Rawls problem and the DeLog problem under the Randolph model and GG model. And right after the next year, Wagner proposed some exponential time attack on the Rawls problem, but as you can see, there's still a gap between like some exponential and like 20. For example, if you sign concurrently with like 1,000 or 200 signing sessions, will happen. And nobody know after 20 years, the one of the best paper in Eurocrypt 2021, they by Bermuda and Napoleon Loss and Ori and Recoba, they propose a polynomial time attack breaking this Rawls problem. So at the moment, people realize that you can, if you have Blind-Schnorr with around like 200 concurrent sessions, you can break the 1 more fungibility. So let's start from like sigma protocol. You might be familiar with this. We have the user and the signer and the proof or say the proofer. And they do commitment challenge response. If the proofer can use the challenge and the response as the signature, right? So if you let this challenge and the response become the signature, become user's signature, then this is an unblinded blind signature. This is true because every sigma protocol-based blind signature, they built from this unblinded blind signature first, and they have to design some spatial mechanism to mask this challenge and to have another mechanism to make sure that after receiving this response, you can turn this response into a different response so that you can the signer cannot tell the difference. But here, for the simplicity of the discussion, let's just consider this unblinded version of the blind signature first. So, and next we consider unblinded blind signature with parallel repetition, which means that the signer sent a bunch of commitment, and then the user sent the challenge string, and then the signer sent a bunch of responses, and you can get a signature. And now we're ready to break Seattle and Blind-OR at the same time. Let's consider we have lambda concurrentization, where the lambda is the same as the number of parallel repetition. And so to start lambda concurrent signing sessions, the user get a bunch of commitment, right? And he cuts the entry in the diagonal. And next, he use this entry together with a message to make a hash query. And next, the user carefully choose this message, for example, message 1, to gather this commit more 1. And then until that the first entry of the first challenge string is the same one as here. And then he choose M2 carefully as well to make sure that the second entry of the second string is the same one as the second entry here. And the last entry in the last tree is the same one as here. And then after obtaining the responses, you cut off this response diagonally, and then you group in this commitment together, this challenge together, and this response together. And then you can break the 1-1 fungibility. This is the L+1's signature, and these are these lambda's signatures. And because Blind-OR and Seattle, they have a small challenge space in each parallel repetition. So for example, Seattle is 2 and Blind-OR is a few hundred, just a few hundred. So it is feasible to do this attack. And we can still have a trade-off between the number of concurrent signalization and the categories. So for example, we can just choose two together, not just one. And then you choose two together. And then you do the same, but just the only difference here is that you have a larger pattern you want to match. So this kind of, you have the concurrent signalization, but you square the number of categories. Yeah, so we can kind of get a trade-off between the concurrent signalization and the hash queries. But does our attack just only apply to when you are using parallel repetition or using small challenge space? If we look deeper, then we can notice that what we are doing is we kind of partitioning the challenge space and then also partitioning the response space, and then we aggregate the response later. Then we can forge the signature as long as the challenge space is small, and then you can always then you can add a trade-off. You have more hash queries to have the desired pattern, and then you can forge the signature. So this makes us to break the one more opportunity of Blaise Plus, where the challenge space is a ternary polynomial over a polynomial ring of Hamming weights omega. So we can decompose the challenge as the summation of omega monomials, and then we can do something similar. And now for each monomial, the challenge space is quite small now, and then we can compute them together, we aggregate this response together, and break the one more fungibility. But notice that we are kind of aggregating the responses. So because lattice signature scheme, they usually have this kind of shortness requirement on the signature. So the resulting response might not always be valid due to the length restriction. And this is the efficiency of our attack. We can have just 4 concurrent signalization with 2 to the 34 hash queries or 43 hash queries. We can break Seattle and blind OR with 1 overwhelming chance. Blaise Plus due to the latest length requirement, we have 7%, still a good probability. And the last one is kind of an example. We want to show that our attack is compatible to the Ross problem. We just mentioned we have the Ross problem on the Schnorr scheme, and then we construct an example we call parallel Schnorr. And in each parallel repetition, the challenge space is pretty large in the Schnorr scheme, but we can mix our attack, hybrid attack with our attack and the Ross problem to attack on this parallel Schnorr with an overwhelming chance. So 2 open problems on this topic is that can we break H20? That's the last sigma protocol base post-quantum balancing so far. And the reason we cannot break this scheme is that we cannot really find a really nice non-preserving decomposition with respect to the response and the challenge space. We can do this for Blaise Plus, but not for H20. And the other question is, can we have a post-quantum WB or concurrently secure sigma protocol based blind signature? And we have to emphasize that it is possible in the classical sense, and is given by Stefano and Zhu in Eurocrypt 2022. And we want to emphasize that the small challenge space is inevitable for some correction-based signature like C-side or core-based or some lattice space. They have this lattice, they have their own, I think you can also view it as a correction, right? So it's inevitable you need to do the parallel repetition, so which means that you also need to design a different parallel repetition so you can prevent our attack. And that concludes our work. And thanks for your listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
The slide where like more with the concurrence.
This one? Oh.
Yeah, or one before. Yeah, so this is good. Do you think the attack still works if the signer sends the commitment, but say 1 bit less, so the commitment minus 1 bit of it, and now the other party has to basically send 2 challenges rather than 1?
Sorry, you say still.
Go one more, maybe
One.
back. Okay, yeah. Me? Yeah, here.
Okay.
It's good. So suppose your commitment here is this kind of vector minus 1 bit of each com1 to com lambda. Okay. And now your challenge would be a hash of the brute forcing of the different coms, right? And now the signer chooses which one of this and then sends the response. Plus the missing bit. Do you think this will still, so the rest attack will still apply to this kind of something? Where you have like 1 bit missing of the commitment.
Yep.
The challenger can hash the com1 or com2, so based on this bit, and then the signer chooses whether it's left or right, since this kind of counts.
Is there missing 1 bit in the commitment?
Yeah.
Think that's interesting, but I think you can.
So basically, when you parallelize, then you don't actually know whether you're left or right as a user.
Yep.
In each session, and you maybe multiply or explode your complexity of the attack. I don't know. You just ask.
Yeah. That is an interesting thing you can try. I couldn't see any obvious attack on this.
Sorry, you.
Yeah, I couldn't see any obvious attack on this.
I'm just wondering whether like the improvements that you made would actually still break this kind of, I don't know.
Improvement? Which one?
No. So the improvement. So when you say you multiply the hash, so you reduce the concurrent session number of concurrent sessions, but you explode the number of hash.
Okay. Yeah.
We may take a offline,
Yeah. Yeah.
Later. I guess.
You know.
Pressure signature. I wasn't sure, but I was thinking might be to look at multi-signature, because I'm not so familiar with threshold signature, but I know this kind of growth problem is tightly related to blind signature and the multi-signature. So I wasn't sure about if this can apply to threshold signature. Okay.
Challenges. Sessions.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Can try.